Here's a quote. There are numerous studies demonstrating both effectiveness and lack of effectiveness of forest density reduction, in parentheses, forest thinning, projects on altering fire behavior and effects. Engaging in toe-to-toe trench warfare with competing science papers would result in a stalemate and a win for the opponents, end quote. They understand completely that there is an enormous body of science contradicting their narrative that thinning is an effective way to curb wildfires, that there's a lot of science contradicting that. They're aware of that science. And in fact, they believe that that science is stronger than the science that they are relying on, because they know that they cannot go toe to toe in a debate over the science, because they would lose.
Welcome, Wild Ones. I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. This episode, I'd like to welcome back Chad Hanson to the podcast. Chad Hanson is a research ecologist and the director of the John Muir Project of Earth Island Institute. Dr. Hanson has a PhD in ecology from the University of California at Davis, with a research focus on fire ecology in conifer forest ecosystems. He's the author of the 2021 book, Smokescreen: Debunking Wildfire Myths to Save Our Forests and Our Climate. He's also co-editor and co-author of the 2024 book, Mixed Severity Fires: Nature's Phoenix. He has published several dozen scientific studies and articles in peer-reviewed journals pertaining to forest fire ecology and climate change. Welcome back to the Green Root Podcast, Chad.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So I brought you on because you're the best person to talk to about this topic. And it's the idea of our government and other, what I call colluding entities, that are pushing logging in our public forests in the name of wildfire. And this first little part of the podcast, I wanted to talk about a report that Eco Integrity Alliance and myself recently put out with proof that this is happening. And then we'll kind of go into a larger discussion of more examples of that, why this might be happening and all the weirdness around it, including a lot of targeting, not just of me and my organization, but you as the primary target in your organization, as well as other scientists. So, okay, this report we put out is called Forest Fire Malfeasance, and it is primarily focused on Colorado, but I think we can agree that this is relevant nationally, and this is what's going on elsewhere. So let me just, instead of poorly explaining, I'll just very briefly read some of the description, and people can check it out themselves and read the whole report. But we want to go through some of this because I really wanted to get Chad's take on this. So, forest fire malfeasance. So, emails expose a Colorado government cover-up of peer-reviewed science and deliberate deception of media and the public to force through taxpayer-funded logging of public lands in the name of wildfire fuel reduction. And the only other piece I'm going to just directly read, just because it summarizes it, and then we'll get into a conversation, is it's just based on hundreds of emails from what's called a Colorado Open Records Act, CORA. It's like a FOIA for Colorado. It shows, in my opinion, indisputable evidence of these Jefferson County, Colorado commissioners and Jefferson County Open Space. They're doing some of the most aggressive form of, quote, fuel reduction in the state. They're them colluding with 23 government officials, land management agencies, logging industry trade groups, NGOs, university fire department, and a government-funded collaborative on what I call an orchestrated disinformation campaign to push through thousands of acres of controversial fuel reduction logging in public forests. Okay, so with all that out of the way, these are just the categories that we had for it, and then we'll maybe talk about a few examples, and I want to get your take on that. So basically, I lay out these different colluding entities. So these emails show all of these folks working together to basically put out false information, provably false information, not just their opinions, but false information, and to make it seem like anyone critiquing them is disreputable. So we have a whole section on disinformation. We have a whole section on basically things that are just inaccurate. Then deceiving media. We have a whole section where we have journalists who are talking to media and asking questions because they want to cover things based on our press releases. And then we have these agencies either frankly lying or misleading or just discouraging them from covering this, and then they don't cover it. We have some targeting of ecological advocates, mostly myself and Chad, and then stuff that I believe falls into the realm of defamation. So, anyway, just generally speaking, did any of this surprise you when you saw it?
No, it didn't surprise me. I think it always is shocking, but it's not surprising because I've seen it many times before. I think what was interesting about this, about your report and about the email messages that you got, is that it shows a candid look into how they actually talk, how they actually think about these issues, which is very, very different from their outward facing presentation of what they say when they're talking to politicians, when they're talking to the press, when they're talking to environmental NGOs. There's a world of difference between what they're saying privately to each other behind the scenes and versus what they're saying publicly. And there's the first main quote there to me. There's a lot of telling quotes in there, but this one to me is pretty dramatic. And if you were planning on reading it, then I'll leave that to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't mind just reading it and just talking about it for a little bit.
Please.
Okay, I'm gonna read it here. So this larger email conversation, and one of these folks is saying, and these are people who are promoting entities, individuals, agencies that are promoting logging under the name of thinning and wildfire reduction, fuel reduction. Here's a quote. There are numerous studies demonstrating both effectiveness and lack of effectiveness of forest density reduction, in parentheses, forest thinning, projects on altering fire behavior and effects. Engaging in toe-to-toe trench warfare with competing science papers would result in a stalemate and a win for the opponents, end quote. So basically, to me, that they're saying here is they understand completely that there is an enormous body of science contradicting the narrative that they're presenting, contradicting their narrative that thinning is an effective way to curb wildfires, and that's good for forest health, protects communities, all the things that they use to promote thinning. That there's a lot of science contradicting that. They're aware of that science, and in fact, they believe that that science is stronger than the science that they are relying on because they know that they cannot go toe to toe in a debate over the science because they would lose. So they're saying specifically we shouldn't do that because if we go into a debate, it will not be good for us. It will be a win for our opponents. That's the quote. So they know they're on the poorer, weaker side of the science. They know that the science that contradicts thinning as a wildfire management strategy, that science is stronger and more abundant, and yet they are consciously making the decision very deliberately to spin a message to the public that the science is settled and that it promotes thinning. In other words, they are resolving here to lie to the public, to deceive the public, and to deceive policymakers to promote a logging agenda as a supposed wildfire management strategy, supposedly just save forests and save towns. And even though they know that it is that the weight of the scientific evidence contradicts them. That to me, that's just a shocking quote, and you don't have a bunch of other people weighing in and saying, "Oh gosh, I can't believe you said that. We would never try to deceive the public." There's just basically, "Oh yeah, sure, this makes sense. Let's just lie to people about the science because we've got a bunch of money from state governments, from the federal government to basically promote this false message to the media, to the public, and to policymakers. So let's just keep doing that because they feel that they can get away with it." That's what that's saying, and it's remarkable. It really is.
Yeah, and just for some details, again, people can read the whole report. Go to forestfiremalfeasance.org. It's not a very long report, but so this was an entity. They're called Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, CFRI. So they are at the Colorado State University. And pretty much everyone who promotes forest cutting, logging in Colorado, they all hold CFRI up as the gold standard. So the beginning of the report has Jefferson County Open Space, who I'm focusing on for this particular aspect, recommending CFRA, excellent website, learn from them. So that's the first quote, just showing how much credibility they place in that. And this email was from Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, but it was sent around by Jefferson County. So again, this county that's doing some of the most aggressive clear cutting, old growth tree logging, et cetera. So they're sending this email around saying, pay attention to this. It's also sent to the U.S. Forest Service, particularly the Ranger District that is carrying out the biggest logging project in Colorado, which is in roadless areas, part of the fake emergency, all of that stuff. And yeah, so this is something that they're internally sharing. And I'm not sure if you noticed the framing. So okay, so science, there's disagreements in science. That's what science is, right? You figure out, okay, well, this information maybe is better, whatever. We learn more here, and okay, we got to rethink that. But they don't look at it as even a discussion. They say engaging in toe-to-toe trench warfare, World War I, with competing science papers, stalemate, win for the opponents. What do you think about that warlike language?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think you're right. It is telling because what it conveys is that from their perspective, this is not a search for the truth. This is not a process of delving into the evidence and finding out what body of evidence is most credible, and then following that evidence. This is, in their view, an information war. And anytime you have government entities, government-funded entities, entities associated with universities, um, logging industry trade groups, basically talking in a coordinated fashion and communicating in a coordinated fashion about carrying out an information war against independent scientists, against environmental advocates with NGOs, against anyone who might contradict them by pointing to the science that they themselves admit is basically larger and more credible. That is a deep concern because basically now you're getting into the realm of propaganda and suppression of scientists and retaliation against scientists for simply speaking the truth and doing their job to gather evidence.
That's right. And that is what this whole report is about. It's them repeatedly using the terms misinformation or disinformation when relating to myself or my organization, other advocates or folks like you who are putting out the science. They keep using those terms, yet privately, I mean, the way I look at it is it's a psychological projection. So they are actually engaging in disinformation. Misinformation is you've made a mistake. Disinformation is it's deliberate.
Right.
And all I'm doing is I'm literally quoting. Sometimes there's these block quotes from peer-reviewed studies, and I'm saying, what about this? And I'm showing photographs. I'm not saying I've never made a mistake. I've never been inaccurate by, stuff like that. I'll correct anything I do that's wrong. But I'm sorry, but that is an argument that's a serious argument and the way that respond. But again, I don't want to go through everything in the report, of course, but I wanted to hear what you think about a couple of these other quotes. So this is
Sure.
that first email. There's a lot of different pieces, but this first email I think is the most telling. So the other thing, when they're not just outright denying the science, which they have done for a long time. Nope, there's no studies. Okay, well, there's only a handful of studies, and they're all done by Chad Hanson. Whatever nonsense they have. Their next favorite thing is to again misuse the dictionary and say, oh, well, you're just cherry picking, right? So basically, just this quote says here, the opponents, us, the opponents, aren't necessarily cherry picking the science. They cherry picking, that's their own grammatical error there. They cherry picking the vague and ill-defined objectives in public forestry agencies' own project proposed actions and national policy. So first of all, I think they're still misusing the term cherry picking, but he says, no, they're not cherry picking the science. They're kind of just beating up on the, what later says like over promises. So they said, I'm concerned the wildfire crisis strategy, again, these are the logging advocates, that this wildfire crisis strategy, which is the U.S. Forest Service's agenda to log tens of millions of acres in the name of wildfire, that it overpromises what forest density reduction can accomplish, blah, 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 blah. So what do you think about that piece?
Well, it's another telling admission. So that it shows that they understand completely that the bulk of the science is pointing to the conclusion that denser forests, forests with more trees, more biomass, more canopy cover, denser mature forests, all things being equal, actually tend to burn at lower intensities in wildfires, not higher intensities. So the narrative that they've been promoting for decades is that if forests will burn much more intensely if they're dense, and therefore we need to remove a lot of trees to reduce their density. Well, it made intuitive sense to them. I think a lot of them really believed it. The problem is the science caught up with them and surpassed them. And most of the science, the great majority of the science now, points to the conclusion that denser forests have a cool, moist, shady microclimate, and the denser tree stands have a buffer against the winds that drive flames. It actually creates more friction, reduces the speed at which the winds can sweep flames through the forest. And in addition, a denser stand has more canopy cover, so you have far less combustible grasses in the understory because grasses need a lot of sunlight. And when you remove a lot of trees, what you have is more sunlight, more drying, higher temperatures, drier air, lower relative humidity, and you have more combustible grasses growing in the understory and faster wind speeds sweeping the flames through more quickly. So that's what the science is telling us now overwhelmingly. And the largest and most comprehensive scientific analyses are pointing to that conclusion. This quote tells us that they know that they're very well aware of that we're not cherry picking, which is what they always say in the media, that somehow, anyone who disagrees with them is cherry picking. They understand that we're actually representing the strong weight of the science. And what's interesting too, and I think this is really important, because they'll try to say, well, that's Chad Hanson and his science. Sure, I published a lot of studies on this, and I have found that that thinning is not effective. It's actually counterproductive if you're trying to manage wildfires. But what they failed to mention, but what they're clearly aware of, is the fact that most of the scientific studies that are contradicting the thinning as wildfire approach now, most of those studies have been authored and published by scientists from the U.S. government itself. Most of those studies are U.S. Forest Service scientists authored. And so on John Muir Project's website, we have a number of fact sheets with citations to these studies, and we call out the ones that are authored by Forest Service scientists, sometimes by U.S. Geological Survey or other government agencies too. But the point is that it's not just independent scientists, it's not just university scientists finding this. We're all finding this too, but it's the Forest Service's own scientists that are increasingly coming to this conclusion that this entire management approach is a failure and is actually counterproductive, and is not accomplishing its stated goal, and in fact is undermining its stated goal. So to me, that fact alone is important, but the fact that the people promoting thinning, continue to promote thinning, are aware of that and are promoting thinning anyway, and promoting more money for thinning out of taxpayers' pockets, that to me is unconscionable.
Yeah, well said. And one last quote from this particular email, just because, again, there's so many gems here. I do want to make it clear that CFRI, the entity that put this out, Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, they have been funded $20 million, millions of dollars from the federal government to address wildfire risk challenges. So they're not like some secret tree huggers. They are part of what I call even the leading edge of the clear cut cult. So it's not like this is one entity that's just secretly favorable. No, they are pushing all of this stuff and are funded, and they're still saying this privately. So this other quote here, at CFRI, The critique being leveled by Eco Integrity Alliance, JMP, John Muir Project, Chad, your organization, and others have provided a critical learning opportunity and is compelling us to step up our own game to be more precise with the concepts, words, and phrases we use internally, what can and can't be claimed from forest management in light of the science, blah, 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 blah. So it goes on. So they hate us. They think we're evil liars publicly. Privately, didn't they just admit that we're helping them?
Well, I don't know if they admit that we're helping them. They certainly admit that they think we're right.
Okay.
I think they admit that they think we're right. They admit that they admit that they have been wrong, and they seem to be resolved to continuing to be wrong while telling the public that they're right.
Okay. I mean, in terms of helping them, just they said critical learning opportunity compelling us to step up our own game. So
I think you're right in a sense. I mean, I think there is a sort of an admission in here that it is given them an opportunity to learn. I think that's true. The problem I have, and this is why I don't want to give them too much credit for that, is that they are not taking that learning opportunity public. They are not saying publicly, okay, John Muir Project, Eco Integrity Alliance, all these independent scientists and a lot of Forest Service scientists are producing and disseminating this scientific evidence, peer-reviewed science, that is indicating that what we believe for decades is wrong. That what we believe that denser forests will burn much more intensely, and that's a bad thing that we can address with removing a whole bunch of trees from the forest, and that will curb fires. That we've been saying that for decades. We believe that for decades. It turns out that that's wrong. If they were saying that we were helping them understand the new and emerging science that is now the dominant science, and that they were changing their views and changing their public messaging, I'd give them a lot of credit for that. But that's not what they're doing, and so I'm willing to give them a tiny bit of credit, but not much.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's a fair point. So moving on to another section here, deceiving media. So a main effort of mine in Colorado, but also west-wide and even nationally, has been to interface with media to just get them the science around these issues, and of course also some advocacy, opinion, whatever. But most of the journalists, media outlets seem to be unaware, etc. And what we have as part of this report is emails from some journalists contacting these different entities. So either Jefferson County Open Space or the U.S. Forest Service in this case, and then base it on our press releases saying, look, we found this particular issue. And what we've seen is we have these government agencies either at best just discouraging them from reporting, at worst making false statements, not difference of opinion. I understand difference of opinion. We stand here and you stand there. Okay. False information to discourage media from reporting on these stories. And in these two cases, the journalists who were interested in reporting on this initially, they went to the entity that's doing this, said, hey, are you guys doing anything wrong? The entities were like, nope, those guys are liars. And then the journalists were like, all right, I guess that's the end of the story. But one thing I wanted to add to that is I've since followed up with these journalists and they have not responded to me at all. So that's worrisome to me. So what do you think?
I mean, this sort of thing is common. This is not this what you uncovered here with this open records request. It's kind of like a cockroach in the kitchen. You see one, it doesn't mean there is one. You see one, that means there's 100 or 1,000. This is the same kind of thing. This stuff is happening constantly. And I've had numerous conversations with reporters who have been candid enough to, off the record, disclose to me that after they ran a story that quoted me, they were contacted and their editor was contacted. In some cases, the publisher was contacted by numerous Forest Service scientists, public affairs officials, university scientists who were funded by the Forest Service, other entities who were funded by the Forest Service and or the logging industry, and told not to communicate with us anymore, not to interview us, not to include quotes from us anymore. And always there's a series of personal attacks, false statements that we misrepresent information or we cherry pick, character assassination, always these things. And it's always behind the scenes, always, well, I'm just telling you this confidentially. There's never any evidence. There's never any examples. They just say this. And it's really troubling how many people in the media who should know better and who should do their due diligence are actually fall for this and are cowed by it somehow, and then just simply won't return phone calls or emails anymore. This happens a lot. And that, of course, is their goal. And meanwhile, they know that we're right. They've admitted that we're right, that we have the stronger argument based on the scientific evidence, and yet they continue to do this. And I'll just say this too. Me and my colleagues, independent scientists, scientists with NGOs, university scientists who do not get money from the Forest Service, and we can pursue scientific questions and evidence as we see fit based on what our pursuit of the truth. We have been, attacked by these folks for years. But first, when they first started attacking us, they were attacking our scientific studies. That went on for about a decade. We would publish something and they would publish a study that ostensibly on the surface was a criticism of our study. And then we'd publish a reply, because that's the way it works in science. If a group of scientists attack your work, you get an opportunity to reply. And we'd publish the response and reply in the same issue of the same scientific journal, peer-reviewed studies. And so our reply would be juxtaposed to their response. And what we would point out in every case is that they didn't even challenge any of our fundamental conclusions. They sort of fly-specked around the edges and made sort of nitpicky arguments. And we said, well, a couple of those have carry some water, but they have nothing to do with our core conclusions. And most of them are just specious. And but then they would cite those studies as if that you should ignore our original study because they had a critique, even though it wasn't a critique. But at least they were doing it in the scientific literature. The problem is that our replies kept pointing out that they didn't even challenge or contest any of our core conclusions. There was no contest to our conclusions. And so basically it was a tacit admission and we were right. And that was not working for them. It got increasingly problematic for them to pursue that strategy. So they stopped doing that about 4 years ago. They stopped trying to debate us in the scientific literature, in the peer-reviewed literature, because they couldn't. They could not go toe-to-toe with us on the science in the peer-reviewed journals. They kept losing. And especially after I came out with my book Smokescreen in May of 2021, which was really basically an expose on how they're misrepresenting science and also, in my opinion, why. They changed their strategy and they stopped talking about our science entirely, and they started going for a strategy of almost 100% personal attacks and character assassination in the media against us. And like the one thing in there, like they were talking about who's Eco Integrity Alliance's funders. Like they've gone after our funders too. They go after people's funding. They will go after you. They'll assassinate your character in the press. And unfortunately, some reporters are not ethical enough to stay away from defamatory comments in news stories, and they think that that's good clickbait, and they will publish that kind of baseless stuff. And so bottom line for me is that they know they can't go toe to toe with us on the science. That's why they're going low and hitting below the belt and going for character assassination. That tells you that they know that they're wrong, and that's why they're going low.
Yeah, and there are many instances of what I call targeting ecological advocates in the report, as well as ranging into defamation. So you can have opinions out there, but there is a line legally in terms of if you are knowingly putting out false information that can harm people's reputation, career, etc., that can be taken up in a court of law. And yeah, just to some of this stuff, I'll just read one of the favorite quotes here is because this starts getting into you, Chad. So blah, blah, blah. So this is, let me remind myself who this was. So this is, the Jefferson County folks who are doing this clear cutting. One thing I'm certain about, however, is that this Chad Hanson, spelled wrong, chap from Cali is 100% full of sh dash. So they didn't write out the full profanity, but I think we can guess what they're saying. And there are other mentions of you in the report as well. It's me and you are their main thing. So yeah, it's just, they mention you in another thing saying that this is Denver Mountain Parks, alleging that you and me are fueling community confusion by daring to cite peer-reviewed studies and have a different opinion than those who want to cut down trees with taxpayer money. So it's just this weird thing. Instead of like, well, they're putting out their perspective. You know what? We don't agree with them, and we're going to offer our rebuttal because we live in a democracy and not an authoritarian government. But instead, they're just saying, look at these liars confusing people. It's like, well, in what way? Please explain where I'm inaccurate, because guess what? I want to fix that. I'm an advocate, right? Well, you're a scientist, which I would say even a higher level, but I'm an advocate, and I don't want to put out inaccurate information because all I have is standing from that high ground of, I think something's a little bit off here. And all I have is my credibility. I have no power or influence other than just my credibility. So I don't want to put out false information, and neither do you. So I agree with your opinion that they don't have any other ammunition, so they just go for us personally, and it works. And yeah, I did just want to mention this other thing. Last thing I'll mention about myself directly was because I wanted to hear your opinion about that. So it was Jefferson County commissioner who, she has been really pushing this stuff. And frankly, I'm going to say it, she has been lying to the public about the age of trees that they were cutting. And she directed a local fire department's chief to investigate my funding sources. Have you ever heard of something like that?
I've never heard of a this person's a county supervisor?
She's the county commissioner, one of the
County
county
commissioner.
commissioners.
I've never heard of a county commissioner directing someone in a fire agency to investigate an advocate or a scientist. But I have seen numerous examples and have been the target of numerous examples of similar things. But I have not directly experienced that with regard to a county commissioner.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to get to the bottom of it and trying to figure that out because my dad, he just recently retired as a volunteer firefighter. My cousin was wildland firefighter. I have a lot of respect for firefighting. I don't understand why they have gotten completely in bed with the logging entity. It's like their job is not to promote public lands logging, but they are, and they're teaming up. And it's like, what problem do you have with advocates saying things that you don't agree with? But that's gets into this phrase that not everyone likes, but I think is accurate. So when these folks, who I call them privately or publicly on my podcast, I guess, but not when talking to them, I call them members of the clear-cut cult. To me, it's this ideology that's almost cultish. And anytime they come across anything that has anything to do with you, even a study that has 12 co-authors and you're one of them, they just freak out and they seem to lose all ability to think rationally. I call it Hanson derangement syndrome and whatever. But do you just think that, so you've slam dunked them, right? It's just something that they can't refute. And so it's sort of just, I'm just making the same point again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, but there's more to it than that, I think. And I think you're right. There is a sort of derangement that happens on their side. You know, they get blue, they get purple in the face, and they start gesticulating wildly. They start stammering. They stop saying things based upon any form of reason, and they get really angry, and sometimes combative and even aggressive. And the question is why? Why isn't it just something that they disagree with or don't like? Why do they get so worked up to the point where it becomes concerning, to the point where they're not thinking rationally, to the point where they're even behaving sometimes aggressively, even violently? And I think that the answer is it's partly what you just said. You call it the clear-cut cult. You could call it the thinning cult too, but there is and I talk about this in my book Smokescreen. I devote a whole chapter to the sort of cult-like aspect of some of the subcultures that promote these things. And for many of them, it is kind of like a religion, and when it is kind of like a cult. When you challenge it, they will react in a very, very visceral and aggressive way, because they've adopted this as a belief system. It's not just a management approach for some of these folks; it's a belief system, and it really goes to the heart of their worldview in many ways. And so it's not about the evidence for them. It's about something that is at least quasi-religious. But the other thing, and this is something that, it has to be talked about, is that there's an enormous amount of money being spread around. The logging companies make billions and billions of dollars logging on not just their own lands or private lands, but also on public lands, county, state, federal lands. Make billions of dollars doing this. And they spend a portion of their profits by spreading around campaign contributions to members of Congress, in the House, in the Senate, the president, to state members of state legislatures. And that is money well spent from their perspective, because a lot of politicians, frankly, they come cheap. They get a little bit of money from the logging industry, and they're willing to advocate for their interests. And we see it all the time. And this is both Republicans and Democrats, not all of them, but a lot of them. And so they're in it for the money. They're making a lot of money, because when they spread around these campaign contributions, the result of that is a much, much larger amount of money taken out of taxpayers' pockets at the state and federal level and allocated to these entities, to private entities that promote logging, to government agencies, state and federal. They get the more money, the more logging they do, and the more they promote logging, like so-called thinning as a wildfire management strategy, the more money they get to do those logging projects and to promote it publicly. And so you have this perverse financial incentive. And in a lot of these agencies, when they sell public trees to private logging companies, they keep the revenue for their budget. So they're literally in the logging business. That's true of the U.S. Forest Service, for example, but it's also true of a lot of county and state entities. So this is a business. This is a big business. And part of the, what you call the derangement, that happens when you're confronting them with facts and evidence that contradict their narrative and their approach, is that you're threatening the gravy train. When we're promoting the science, the sound, peer-reviewed science on this, that is the weight of scientific evidence, it threatens to stop the flow of cash out of taxpayers' pockets and into their pockets to do all these things that they know are not effective and are counterproductive, that they now know and admit are wrong and harmful and false, but highly lucrative.
Yeah, no question about the money. And of course, there is money to be had in the selling of the logs, but just the vast flood of taxpayer subsidies. It seems like the only thing that's not being cut in the federal government is money to do more logging. So that's just pretty sweet stuff to keep sucking down, whether it's coming from the federal level. We have a ton coming from the state level here in Colorado. It also comes from county, it comes from all over the place. But so I 100% agree with the money component, and I don't want to keep you much longer, but I just wanted to sort of wind down with this. I think it actually goes deeper. I think there's a psychological component. And you did mention that in the terms of it being religious, but there's something called psychological projection. So it's sort of like, if you haven't acknowledged a part of you that Carl Jung calls, oh God, I'm going into psychology here, but anyway, calls the shadow. It's the parts of yourself that you might not have acknowledged. Maybe, you're a bit of a dick, but you think you're a nice guy, stuff like that, right? If you haven't acknowledged that about yourself, you start seeing it in everyone else, whether it's there or not. It's called psychological projection. So I think what's happening is there is this cognitive dissonance in their mind where all this information of like, we're doing the right thing, but then there's information, blah, blah, blah. So instead of realizing, oh, wait, we are putting out disinformation, we are doing misinformation, we're deceiving, we're misleading, we're doing cherry picking. No one seems to understand what that term is, just like that it's bad. But the agencies and these entities are saying, we're going to look at this science, this Forest Service study is what counts, these don't. That is what cherry picking is. And then when we're pointing out, oh, look how you're cherry picking and what you left out, that is not cherry picking. Pointing out somebody else cherry picking is not cherry picking. That frustrates me so much. It's like, can we go back to the dictionary and use words? But anyway, so I think what's going on is deep down, everyone, we all want to believe that we're doing the right thing. And then maybe there's information that's coming in that's showing us otherwise. That hurts people deep down in their soul and their psyche. And so the only response is like, they're bad guys, attack them. So what do you think about my armchair psychology there?
Oh, I think you're spot on. I think that's definitely a component of this for sure. People don't want to wake up in the morning and look themselves, in the mirror and think, "Hey, I'm going to lie to the public today, because it's lucrative for me, and that makes me, a kind of a questionable person." People want to think of themselves as decent people. They don't want to admit that they're lying and doing so for questionable reasons, or doing so at all. They don't want to admit that they're promoting things that are questionable and they're doing it for money. Um, People need to think of themselves in a good light, but it's much more important to act in a way that is positive and good, rather than just think of yourself in a good light. And so, but it is difficult for people, and I think that there's a part of that. I think there's some cognitive dissonance going on there, and that's part of the reaction. Hey, I want to read something else from the report. Another one of the quotes that was at the bottom of one of the quotes you read. You read the top part, but I think the bottom part is just as important. I'm just going to read it real quickly. This is in the quote you read earlier about them talking about cherry picking and basically admitting that we're not cherry picking. But at the bottom, the quote says, "I'm concerned the wildfire crisis strategy overpromises what forest density reduction can actually accomplish vis-a-vis the lofty objective of saving homes and communities from catching fire. What additional density reduction could have reduced the impacts of the Marshall Fire?" End quote. To me, that is really important, because one of the key narratives that the proponents of thinning are promoting is that we need to do this massive amount of logging out in these wildlands, especially on public lands, far from communities, and that's somehow going to stop a fire from reaching towns. And this quote tells us that behind the scenes, privately, they know that's not true. Now, we know it's not true because there's a ton of science, including from a lot of Forest Service scientists, telling us that thinning actually makes fires spread faster toward towns, and that it doesn't stop fires. They actually move faster toward towns, which means people have less time to evacuate. We also know from the current science that a lot of the towns that are most vulnerable are nowhere near a forest, like we saw in the Marshall Fire. And these are grass fires. They're savanna fires. They're chaparral fires, but they're not forest fires. We saw that earlier this year, tragically, in Altadena and Pacific Palisades in the Los Angeles area. No forest anywhere nearby, and yet communities were devastated. And so, if our goal, the point is, if our goal is to protect towns from wildfire, it has nothing to do with forest management. It has to do with home hardening. It has to do with defensible space pruning immediately around homes, whether they're near a forest or not. It has to do with evacuation planning and assistance. It has to do with focusing on public safety at the community itself, not backcountry logging. This tells me that they know that this approach of backcountry logging is basically associated with continued devastating losses of communities to wildfire, including many times losses of lives. They know that this doesn't work, and that we will continue to see large-scale losses of towns and lives to wildfires if they continue backcountry logging as a so-called approach to protect communities. They know that, and yet they're committed to continuing to doing it. And that, to me, again, is really, really troubling, because that's not just disinformation. That's disinformation that is literally risking people's lives.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. And like I said, I don't want to keep you much longer. I do have one last question for you. But for
Sure.
folks who want to read the whole report, forestfiremalfeasance.org, you can breeze through the report in about 15, 20 minutes. It's not that long, but it has all the quotes extracted, and then you can click and you can actually have the screenshots of the actual emails. So that's all real. And So here's I guess my last question for you is, how do we deal with this better? Doesn't it seem like their deceit and their lying is pretty darn effective? Like, isn't what they're doing and saying just making stuff up? Isn't that kind of working for them?
It works superficially and temporarily. There's no question about that. But it only works to the extent that scientists who are following the evidence and publishing that evidence that may contradict them, it only works to the extent that they're willing to stand down or be silent or be intimidated and go away. It only works to the extent that environmental advocates like yourself get intimidated and are cowed by their retaliation and their attempts to assassinate our characters. And it only works to the extent that we go away and we shut up. If they try to silence us, it works if we stay silent. And it only works to the extent that others don't see what's happening and basically stay silent themselves. If others join and start raising their voices and don't just assume that a handful of environmental advocates and scientists have got this covered, and they understand that they need to get involved too, then everything changes. And so it's not ultimately an effective strategy. It's like the old adage in politics, negative campaigning is highly effective unless it's countered. And then it actually works against the candidate who was going negative.
That's great insight. Really appreciate that. And that's hopeful. And yeah, so if you're listening to this, speak out a little more. They're not going to come at you as hard as they've come at Chad, and probably not even as hard as they've come at me in Colorado. And if we all speak up more, they can't come for all of us. And I will privately admit that while this has harmed my work and my reputation amongst certain, I'll just say soft-minded or ideologically captured individuals, it's actually helped in some way. And they are afraid of us. That's one thing I've learned from these emails. They are quaking in their boots, knowing that we're on to them. So yeah, I think you're right. I think the more we put information out there, it may take a little while. It may have to get worse before it gets better so more people can see it. But I think we're on the right track. And
well, let me add one other thing there, because I actually think it already is getting better. I mean, it's not fun being attacked by these folks, but you're right. They're going to attack me the most. They're going to attack you a lot too. But someone writing a letter to the editor in the local newspaper, do it. Please do it. And the fact that people are afraid of being attacked is all the more reason to speak up, because we shouldn't live in a world, in a society where we are ostensibly a representative democracy, but free speech is increasingly under threat. You have to fight for free speech, right? It's not just something you take for granted. But I think that we have to keep in mind that these are folks who are admitting privately in these emails that they know we're effective, that they know that they are not effective. They know that they're wrong. They know that the narrative is slipping away from them for the simple reason that it's not an information war. Ultimately, it's about the truth. It's about the evidence. And when enough people start getting involved and seeing that these narratives, even if they believed them in the past, they know they're false now, and that they know that the evidence points in a different direction, then things start changing. And this tells us, I think, that they understand that we're being effective, and they understand why we're being effective, because we have the truth on our side.
I agree. I like that framing. So thanks, Chad, for coming on the podcast and talking about this. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. Eco Integrity Alliance, this is our main campaign, but you folks at John Muir Project are really leading the charge nationally on this, and we really appreciate everything you're doing. And more folks are speaking out on this, and it's turning out to be this wildfire pretense logging. A lot of people called us alarmists, but it's turning out to be one of the biggest land destruction schemes that we've ever seen. So if folks want to find out more about you or find your books, how do they do so?
Well, they can go on to the John Muir Project's website. That's www.johnmuirproject.org. John Muir, just like the conservationist. And they can get Smokescreen. You can just Google Smokescreen. The full title is Smokescreen Debunking Wildfire Myths to Save Our Forests and Our Climate. And you can get that on bookstore.com. You can get that through the publisher, which is University Press Kentucky, or through Amazon.
Great books. Definitely recommend that, as well as Nature's Phoenix. Essential to have if you have any concern about not just this topic, but nature in general. So thanks again, Chad.
My pleasure. Happy to do it anytime.